When people discuss Jewish law and tradition, they often refer to three major concepts: the Law of Moses, the Midrash, and the Talmud. Although they are related, they represent different layers of religious teaching that developed over many centuries. Understanding the relationship between them helps explain how Judaism moved from the ancient biblical world into a complex legal and intellectual tradition that still influences Jewish life today. The Law of Moses is the foundation of Jewish religious law. It refers primarily to the commandments found in the Torah, traditionally believed to have been given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. The Torah consists of 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and contains both narrative history and legal instructions. Within these books are the famous 613 commandments, known as mitzvot, which govern everything from worship and sacrifices to dietary rules, ethical behavior, and social justice. In ancient Israel, the Law of Moses functioned as both religious guidance and a legal framework for society. For example, it established rules about the Sabbath, dietary laws such as keeping kosher, and moral principles like prohibitions against theft and murder. However, the written text of the Torah often presents laws in a concise, or sometimes ambiguous form. A commandment might state what must be done, but not explain exactly how to carry it out in everyday situations. As Jewish communities grew, and circumstances changed, especially after the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple in 70 CE, teachers and scholars began to interpret and expand on these laws to make them applicable to new contexts. This is where Midrash enters the picture. The word Midrash comes from a Hebrew root meaning to seek or to interpret. Midrash is a collection of interpretive writings that explore and explain passages of the Hebrew Bible. Rather than simply repeating the biblical text, Midrash attempts to uncover deeper meanings, resolve apparent contradictions, and fill in gaps in the narrative. For instance, if a biblical story seems to leave out details about a character's motives or actions, a midrashic commentary might offer a creative explanation. Midrash operates in 2 main forms. The first is legal interpretation, which attempts to clarify how biblical commandments should be practiced. The second is narrative interpretation, which expands stories from Scripture in order to teach moral lessons or theological ideas. Midrash does not replace the Law of Moses, but acts as a method of engaging with it, almost like a conversation between later scholars and the ancient text. As Jewish scholarship continued to develop, these interpretations became increasingly structured and systematic. This led to the creation of the Talmud, one of the most important works in Jewish intellectual history. The Talmud is a massive compilation of discussions about Jewish law, ethics, customs, and biblical interpretation produced by generations of rabbis between roughly 200 and 500 CE. The Talmud is built around an earlier legal code, called the Mishnah, compiled around the year 200 CE by Judah Hanazi. The Mishnah organized many oral traditions and legal rulings that had been passed down among Jewish teachers. Later scholars added detailed commentary and debate on the Mishnah. This commentary is called the Gemara. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara form the Talmud. Unlike the Law of Moses, which presents commandments as divine instructions, the Talmud records conversations and debates among rabbis. In fact, disagreement is a defining feature of the Talmud. Multiple rabbis might offer different interpretations of a law, and the text preserves these disagreements rather than eliminating them. This style reflects the rabbinic belief that studying and debating the law is itself a religious act. The Talmud therefore functions not just as a law code, but also as a record of intellectual exploration. One key difference between the Law of Moses and the Talmudic tradition is authority and origin. The Law of Moses is considered part of divine revelation. It comes directly from God according to Jewish tradition. The Midrash and Talmud, by contrast, are human interpretations and discussions about that revelation. However, within Rabbinic Judaism, these interpretations carry enormous authority because they represent the accumulated wisdom of generations of scholars. Another important difference lies in method and scope. The Law of Moses is relatively brief and focused on fundamental commandments. The Midrash expands these commandments by explaining them or connecting them to stories and moral lessons. The Talmud goes even further by systematically analyzing legal problems, hypothetical cases, and practical questions. For example, the Torah commands that the Sabbath be kept holy and that no work be done. The Talmud explores what counts as work, defining categories of prohibited activities, and discussing countless practical scenarios. These layers of interpretation also reflect historical changes in Jewish life. When the Torah was written, the religious center of Israel was the temple in Jerusalem, where priests performed sacrifices. After the temple's destruction, by the Romans in 70 CE, Jewish religious life had to adapt. Without a central temple or priesthood, authority shifted to teachers and scholars known as rabbis. Their interpretations, recorded in the Mishnah, Midrash, and Talmud, helped reshape Judaism into a tradition centered on study, prayer, and community life rather than temple rituals. Despite these differences, the law of Moses, Midrash, and Talmud are deeply interconnected. The Torah provides the foundational text. Midrash interprets and elaborates on that text. The Talmud organizes debates and applies those interpretations in a systematic legal framework. Together they form the backbone of what is often called Rabbinic Judaism, the dominant form of Judaism from late antiquity to the present. To summarize, the law of Moses represents the original written commandments given in the Torah. Midrash is a body of interpretive literature that seeks to uncover deeper meanings and explanations within the biblical text. The Talmud is a vast compilation of rabbinic discussions that analyze and apply those teachings in everyday life. Rather than replacing one another, these traditions build upon each other, forming a layered system of law, interpretation, and debate. Understanding this relationship is essential for appreciating how Jewish law functions. It is not simply a fixed set of ancient rules, but a living intellectual tradition that evolved through interpretation and discussion over many centuries. Through the law of Moses, Midrash, and the Talmud, Judaism developed a way of preserving ancient revelation while continually adapting it to new historical realities.